Jesus is saying you cannot have mission without holiness. That holiness is the gateway to having an impact with regard to your mission in your life. And without holiness, you won't see any kind of impact. And you think about today, as compared to the early church, you ask yourself the question, why is it that Christians just aren't effective? Look at the Bible Belt. There's more Christians per capita in the Bible Belt than I don't know where else in the world. Why aren't we more effective? Why is it that the early church had far fewer Christians and yet had a far greater impact? Could it be that they understood this dynamic? Could it be that they understood what it meant to not be of the world, not be out of the world, and yet be in the world, and they accomplished that through a radical, intense commitment to holiness? And I think that's true. You read the early church literature, you read some of their documents on how they do church and church discipline and what they expected from believers. I mean, some would look at them and say, well, you're being a little legalistic, aren't you? Aren't you a little bit too focused on morality? Aren't you a little too focused on that? And they'd say, you better believe we're focused on it, because we know that it's through a commitment to holiness that the world changes. Why is it that people today reject Christianity? They reject the church. You look at every survey, the number one reason, what is it? Christians are hypocritical. They don't walk the walk. They say one thing and they do another. And I'm always one to suggest, well, the truthfulness of the message of Christianity has nothing to do with the moral commitments of its adherents, but that's a rabbit trail. What they really mean to say is, if it doesn't change their life, why would it change mine? And Jesus is saying, you're not going to change the world unless there's a commitment to holiness. Sanctify them in the truth. There's got to be a submission to the Word of God. Last week we talked about abiding in the Word, that we're persuaded by the truthfulness of the Word, that we're attracted to the beauty of the Word, that we're convinced of the promises of the Word, and the Word of God becomes nourishment and this soul-satisfying thirst quencher that nothing else can satisfy. And it's through that submission to the Word of God that we become disciples of the Lord. And Jesus is saying, in the same way, so also is mission. You cannot have discipleship without submission to the Word, and you can't have submission without submission to the Word, because it's through the submission of the Word that God begins to make you a holy kind of person, and it is only holy people who will be successful in mission. And it's a certain kind of holiness, isn't it? It's not the kind of holiness where you're this holier than thou, I'm better than you, judgmental in your ivory tower. That's not mission. That's not into the world. That's what the Pharisees did. You remember the Sermon on the Mount? Jesus wasn't too friendly towards that kind of holiness. They were like a snowflake, beautiful, intricate. Their morality was flawless, but they were as cold as ice, willing to sacrifice our love. They missed it. And Jesus is saying, the kind of holiness I'm asking from you is a holiness, a humble holiness. A holiness that is born out of a humility, a poverty of spirit, a sweet surrender that you see your sinfulness. And yeah, maybe some people say you didn't get it right, but you go, if they only knew the whole story, then they'd really hate me. It's this sense of I'm such a sinner and yet I'm so loved. And out of that humility and desire and hunger for righteousness and to be sent and to be an agent of change in the world, that's the kind of holiness that changes your city, that changes your marriage, that changes your family, changes the world. And without that, you've got nothing. There's no mission without holiness. And you say,